Thanks for the introduction, Karthik. How many of you here have never had any kind of friction with your product teams? By the raise of hands. As a guest, has anybody found the magic to have like this frictionless engagement with your respective product teams? 80% of you here are engineering leaders. I'm sure like the dysfunctions that you see in these kind of engagements with the product teams can sometimes result in a lot of wastage. Today we're talking about the theme of efficiency and sustainability in engineering organizations. And I'm sure if you can get rid of this dysfunction in an increasingly demanding world where you've been asked by a board, by your CEOs, to actually do more with less, it's very important to eliminate this wastage. Today I'll be sharing some of these observations and sort of lessons that I've learned over the years, having worked at different companies which have enabled me to at least minimize these dysfunctions, if not get rid of them. And having worked at companies of all the sizes, big and small, big tech, all the way to small startups, one thing I found is that despite the differences in the cultures and the operational models, some of these challenges tend to be fairly consistent and common. Today, my goal is to sort of structure this talk as some of the problems I've seen in my recent journey at Cedar. What was the diagnosis of some of the problems that I was seeing, and then share with you the framework I've used to solve some of these problems over the course of 2 years I've been there. Now, I'll say that obviously not all the solutions will be applicable to you in your respective contexts as is, but hopefully you can take away some of the structures and like the principles which might help in your respective organizations. So a couple of years ago, when I started at Cedar, and I started doing the listening tour like most leaders would do when they start in a new organization, I came across a bunch of sentiments that the engineers and the engineering managers on my team shared. I'm sure you've seen some flavor of this in your respective organization as well. And when you think about this, right, it's easy to understand why this could happen, where someone would say that, hey, I don't have all the business context for the problems we are solving. Everything is being sort of given to us as a task by the PM teams. What do we do in scenarios where basically the deadlines are being set with customers without sort of involving us? And I was like, okay, this makes sense. And in some sort of contexts and cases, these problems were very local to the squads and the teams. But some of the themes actually were very consistent across all of the engineering organization. I myself, being a product engineer, over the course of the next few months, as I started working closely with product managers and started building trust with them, they started to open up as well. And they started sharing similar kinds of sentiments about the engineering counterparts they were working with. Sometimes we ship stuff with too much sort of, too many quality issues, there are bugs. Often there could be problems in having bad estimations. I don't know if anybody here has ever solved the problem of accuracy in estimations, but obviously, that's a concern our product counterparts shared as well. Now, I should say that, it's not like our engineering and product teams sort of butt heads all the time. They are the best, obviously, but I'm merely highlighting the problems which I was seeing, and in many cases, these are not unique to what I saw at Cedar. So the more I started thinking about this, it's not very hard to sort of see the patterns, draw some observations of why these problems would happen. Often in a fast-moving culture, you would have people with different kinds of expectations, with different kinds of goals, and different kinds of contexts, which can result in a lot of this friction. In many cases, the processes might fail them, which again ends up being an issue. And even if all those things were actually resolved, in many scenarios, what I found is that it's often rooted in having the wrong kind of archetypes solving different kinds of problems. The typical example of square peg in a round hole, where you're not actually giving the right kind of responsibilities to the people, which suits them, and they are really equipped to solve from not just a skill perspective, but a mindset perspective as well. So the way I would suggest using this framework is to think about the problem, which often you would encounter in this context, in terms of the people and accountabilities, the incentives which condition them to behave in certain ways on a daily basis, and fundamentally the practices which enable them to stay aligned in these incentive systems. With this framework, I would assume you can use your own flavor of problem solving, but in general, what I found is that across organizations I've worked at, this tends to sort of hold fairly steady. Let's start with the most important aspect of this solution, which is people, right? In the context of engineering, obviously, I wanted to start by looking at different archetypes within my own organization. And at Cedar, what we typically have come to conclusion is that we have, broadly speaking, 3 archetypes of people who exist. There are the architect archetypes, who are the people who really care about sustainability of systems. They care about like how much can we reuse and simplify the systems, have end-to-end maintenance sort of considered when we are actually building things from the scratch. They are the people who focus a lot on the how. Then there are also people, the ones who complain about like, estimation issues or deadlines being imposed and not having control over their destiny. They are the tech lead type of archetypes who tend to interface a lot with product managers. They care about like, defining the problems, or rather scoping the problems and defining the solutions. And they tend to think about the what quite a lot. And finally, the people who can deal the most with ambiguity, they are the solver archetypes. They are the ones who actually appreciate being given as much business context as possible. And in many scenarios, they have the willingness to deal with that ambiguity, sometimes even hack things together, have quick and dirty solutions, which can actually generate a lot of business value. Now, no single archetype is the, one size fits all or the best. We totally understand that each of these archetypes complement each other. And in reality, actually, we really appreciate having people who can slot into one of these sort of archetypes fairly well, because in different contexts, we do need them. Also increasingly important for us is that in an evolving marketplace, like in the past 8 to 9 months, generative AI has become such a thing. We've been investing in that. We want to incentivize the right trusted people, obviously considering their archetypes, to be empowered to take risks. And the way sort of, if you think about finding the right product success in an evolving marketplace, it's a non-convex search problem, right? You don't want to just be making incremental progress because you'll be stuck in the local minima. What we really want to encourage is stochastic gradient descent. People should make certain leaps in a probabilistic manner. They should fail at times. But what's important is actually giving them the right directional context so that they really know what the objective function is. They really know sort of how to accomplish that sort of best solution out there and do that with a little bit of like, room to fail. One visual imagery which I find very fascinating. This is an intersection, for people who live in the Bay Area. It's in the Seaport, Redwood City area where often I take my daughter for bike rides. The thing here is that it's an interesting merge, right? Where in both the directions you see like the roads merging, and also in the direction sort of, where you have to make a left, there's a very sharp left, and there's a left, which is at an angle. Now imagine the world where you don't have directional context for where you are supposed to go, and how far along you are, and only being given the instructions for left, right, go straight. People who are navigating that, the leaders here, will often find that if you're actually trying to get the driver to go in the direction of that sort of slightly angled left in the direction of oncoming truck using simply go left, it's very likely that the driver will miss that turn because it seems very risky. You don't want to go in the direction of the truck, but that's the intended sort of destiny or destination. And in these cases, right, like these left turns which are made wrong happen quite often in the business world if you're not providing the right context. If you give the destination, if you give the right sort of autonomy, people should be able to sort of maneuver themselves. So context, the right archetypes, and a little bit of tolerance for failure is what sort of makes sure that people can actually be given the right expectations and can have the autonomy. But despite all of that, what is also important is setting the right sort of incentives for them to operate in the right way. I'm sure most of you here are conditioned to operate in the ways sort of you get incentivized. I'm one guilty of sometimes having bad behaviors because the incentive system sort of drives me in that direction. And people, when sort of given the right sort of incentives through a framework of the right value systems, the right principles and practices, often will do the right things. This is an image which I actually stole from one of the talks which was given at QCon conference, which I truly like. And the reason for that is like often organizations will focus on practices, do pair programming, do certain kinds of things which help you like document better. That's good, but not great. Often these practices can evolve with changing circumstances. they are often supported by a good principle rooted in value system. And I really want to encourage everyone here to think about what are the value systems that they foster in their organizations. In our company, we have at the company level some value systems, but also within engineering, we tend to use certain values which make day-to-day job very easy. One which I really appreciate is process-based rent, where you can have tons of meetings and sometimes not generate value. So we try and every once in a while do spring cleaning, get rid of meetings. We also have values like explicit over implicit, which is like try and focus on having more documentation or readable code versus like ease to write the code so that you can maintain that. So those are some examples, but the key lesson here is that when you're trying to come up with values, make sure that your values are actually actionable and specific. How many of you here have ever worked in an organization where you just had a value system of one word? Honesty, integrity, teamwork. Has anyone experienced that? I've experienced that. And I did not find those values helpful in making good decisions. This is a good, a representative example of what could happen. You could say, have teamwork. You can see teamwork, but it's not actually adding value, right? It's just people congregating together without doing things. So being actionable and specific is very important. The other thing I would say is, have values which are actually relevant for your organization. I, for one, am a big fan of different organizations which can have very counterintuitive values. But those values make sense for their setup, for their business, and if they really believe in that, that's what they should actually invest in. If you're a fast, viral, social company, then speed is of more essence than maybe the quality, because you want to make sure you can grow your user base. We work in healthcare. For us, quality is of utmost importance, because if we compromise on quality, there are consequences. You could have data breaches. You could have a lot of penalties if you violate the data in unintended ways. And what we actually care for is safety. So these are like some of our sample company values. I'm not going to go over them, but the one I truly like, which might be worth giving a try for your organizations, is use good judgment. This basically encapsulates the notion that we cannot give you an exhaustive rule book for making decisions in every day of your job. We want to empower people to make the right choices. We want people to actually take risks. And it's okay to fail every once in a while. And trust me, like this value has helped us a lot in day-to-day basis, where sometimes people come up to me and ask for guidance. And in many cases, right, like I tell them that it's their choice to make certain kinds of judgment calls, which is okay. The other incentive, I think, which is very important, that I'm sure all of you are kind of aware of, but I just want to spell it out, is making sure that people are incentivized to operate in a way which benefits them as well. Even with the best interest to serve an organization, people want their self-interests to be taken care of. And one way, as leaders, we control some of these behaviors is how we evaluate people during performance reviews. At Cedar, what we've figured out is that the way we want to celebrate people's accomplishments is by ensuring that not only their contributions, but their outcomes are helpful to the organization. And it's in some ways like a function of your personal contributions and the outcomes you're generating. I would say that we have higher error bounds for people who are maybe doing like a good or good enough job contributing to the team, which is actually winning. Because at the end of the day, a person doing great job, putting in a lot of time, not delivering any kind of outcomes, still does not help the organization. And again, it's a judgment call. It's somewhere on the spectrum of personal contributions and outcomes. But on any given day, I would rather choose and celebrate someone who's doing good contributions to a winning team. This, again, may or may not apply to your respective organization, but some of the challenges I was seeing at Cedar was related to the fact that there was a lot of tribal knowledge. There were a lot of decisions being made, but people did not know how those were made. What was the provenance of a decision, especially in the context of technology changes or like certain designs. And the thing that, I highly recommend reading the blog, which is linked here, like how Stripe created a culture of writing. It starts from the top. Their CEO does that. And I think even when I joined Cedar, we had a pretty decent writing culture, but not in the way that was helping us solve the problem of silos. What we've done since then to fix the problem is to make sure that we incentivize both through values and performance reviews, emphasis on documenting things, and What this means is we give shout-outs to people who are actually doing technical documentation. We've created the right forums where we record architecture decisions. This is a sample of what we call architecture decision records. This is real. I've redacted the names, but you can see the cadence at which we are publishing these kind of like architecture decisions across the company on our Confluence page. There's a recording of the meeting where things are being debated and discussed. There are sort of extensive notes. And this actually helps create the kind of like awareness and knowledge, which helps not only people on my team, but myself. Like, sometimes I have these questions of like, what was that thing that we decided about 8 or 9 months ago? I can go back and look at that log and come back knowing that this was the context in which a certain decision was made. And we can revisit some of these things in posterity as well. This, I would say, is a must-have for almost all of you. I've been in organizations, and trust me, I'm sure you've experienced this. There is a natural tendency to reward people who are visible, who speak up, but we tend to often ignore the people who are actually more engaged by listening. At any point in time, what I've found is that people who are truly like listening tend to contribute more in a thoughtful way. And what we tend to do at Cedar is reward engagement over decibels. We don't want people sucking the oxygen out of the room. We want people actually being very engaged and asking the right questions, contributing in a manner which actually builds up on top of what is being discussed. A few small tricks which might help you do this, obviously, is create the right etiquettes and celebrate those. In our Zoom calls, we tend to raise our hands quite a lot so that we give everybody a chance to speak up. We don't let anybody dominate the conversation. Sometimes in meetings where we really want people to be highly engaged, we call out distraction. We don't want people to be sort of multitasking. It's okay to sort of decline a meeting and not participate versus be half present. Finally, intentional practices to sort of bring everything together. So some of the problems we are seeing where to begin, right? Like the problem I was seeing was friction resulting in lack of efficiency in how we operate, how we prioritize things. The way we started solving that was through people, through incentive systems, but practices are important to align these things. Often the challenges are like people are focused on different things because their definition of success is so different from one another. Sometimes we focus a lot on internal success versus customer success. Each role has different sort of responsibilities and tasks. This is like a Venn diagram of how different people within our R&D group tend to sort of focus on different things. There is a fair amount of overlap, but they might be trying to strive for different goals, right? So being very explicit in how we want certain roles and responsibilities to operate is very critical. Internally, we use something called as a RACI matrix. I'm sure you've heard of it. RACI stands for responsible party, accountable party, people who are consulted and informed. And this is a sample RACI for the engineering managers and tech leads for the kinds of tasks where they have to be accountable, they have to consult certain people, and being very explicit with that helps people streamline their daily activities. This particular thing has been a game changer for me. I've been in organizations where I've seen deaths by committee, nothing gets done, there's a lot of bike shedding. The concept of directly responsible individual has been a game changer. We tend to use that quite a lot at Cedar. We pre-decide who's going to make a decision and then empower them to make that decision. We use something called SPADE, which was popularized by Square, now Block, back in the day. It's a framework where basically you just set the context for why you're trying to make a decision, who are the people involved, who's responsible, who's approving, who's being informed. And then you work through alternatives, you make a decision, and you explain why the decision was made. This gets used extensively. Literally last week, I drafted a SPADE 4 decision for some key strategic decisions that we're trying to make at company. And the consistency here definitely helps. Finally, as leaders, one of the key decision-making moments where you actually control the behavior of everyone through some common practices is planning, right? Whether it's annual planning, quarterly planning, it matters quite a lot that you really participate here because lack of engagement here, lack of ruthless prioritization results in a lot of bad downstream behaviors. Being good at this will help you avoid a bunch of challenges. Since we're running short on time, I'm not going to go through all the details, but one thing I'll say is that make sure your planning process is very inclusive of engineers. As engineering leaders, you want to have skin in the game. This is the journey of a sample planning exercise that we do at Cedar. It might look overwhelming here, but it's actually incorporating a lot of the things which are happening organically at the team level, at the sort of what we call pillars. Basically, it's composition of teams. And then, finally at the engineering and product team level. But if you actually think about it, it's very simple. And one natural question that you might ask is like, how does engineering influence the product outcomes? The thing that I'll say, which is the biggest lesson I've learned, is that don't try and make engineering priorities exclusive to your product plans. Try and incorporate them in what your OKRs are, because if it becomes a thing which is outside of that, it will always get deprioritized. One thing I've negotiated with my peer on the product side is make sure that a sixth of the capacity is given to technical investments, which helps solve a lot of problems. It becomes part of the OKR process. I try and manage it with a lot of leads on my team to make sure that we are not peanut buttering that sixth of a capacity across all the teams, and we can be strategic in what we're investing in. I think what this is trying to call out is that the stage where I and my product counterpart are actually working on making sure the prioritization is ruthless is a very critical step. We try and make sure that dependencies and everything else is accounted for as well, because in absence of that, you might keep a lot of dangling priorities, and not resolving them in a timely manner can result in a lot of downstream churn. Finally, what are the lessons? We've had a lot of departments, sales, marketing, product and engineering have their own objectives. Even within product engineering, sometimes we would have our different objectives. Try and just have shared objectives. You can have different KRs, but if your objectives are not shared, you will be working in silos, which doesn't help anyone. You'll be constrained on resources. You will actually be requiring more to do more. This is not how you solve the problem of doing more with less. Try and have a clear DRI for whatever the planning process is, because that's going to pay dividends. You can empower them, you can make them accountable. And at the end of the day, try and leave a little bit of slack in your planning process, because you are going to make pivots, and having a tightly packed sort of plan often results in disappointment. So with that, I will say that, independent of whatever solutions you choose, make sure you have very specific and consistent rules of engagement with the product teams. And if you have more questions, I want to chat about any of these topics, you can find me after the talk. These are my contact details. Thank you.